All right. Well, hello, all of you out there. My name's
Right.
Chandra. This is Robin. I'm the Western Oregon Field Coordinator for Oregon Wild based in Eugene. And for those of you who might be new to Oregon Wild, we are a statewide conservation organization dedicated to protecting and restoring Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters as an enduring legacy for Oregonians. So, big mission, and we've been doing these webcasts for several months now. For those of you who've been tuning in regularly, the next little bit will sound routine, which it is, but a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So, first of all, if your screen suddenly freezes or the presenter slideshow disappears or something like that, just try closing your browser completely and then use the event link you got in your email to rejoin. We are recording tonight's webcast and we'll email you a link to the recorded video tomorrow. And it'll also be on Oregon Wild's website so you can share. It's actually also going to be on Robin's website. You can enter your questions for us at any time using the question bubble on the webcast interface as is illustrated on the screen right now. Those questions will go to me and we'll try to see how many we can get through in our Q&A section at the end of our talk. And for those of you who bought raffle tickets, we appreciate your support. The funds we're generating through the raffle will help us put on presentations like this and also to support other important conservation work. So thanks. And if you are a winner, we will email you tomorrow. So watch your email and we'll confirm your shipping address. And finally, next week, our webcast is featuring Wolverine or Wolverines in Oregon. We're going to be joined by Scott Shively and Kayla Dare of the Wallowa Wolverine Project, and we hope you can join us to learn more about this really incredible species, very tenacious like this cat.
One right there.
And how you can advocate for their recovery. So check out OregonWild.org for more information and to sign up for that. So our guest this evening is Robin Hostick, who is a lifelong adventurer and appreciator of Oregon's wild places and rivers, and a landscape painter who has created 6 gorgeous works that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. This webcast is going to be more of a conversation than some of our typical presentations. So we'll both be here and I'll be sharing my screen throughout. So to start things off, Robin, you've been exploring Oregon for a long time. So maybe introduce yourself and tell us a couple of your favorite places in Oregon, both on a personal level, but also for the purposes of your art.
Yeah. My name's Robin Hostick, as you said. And I'm a lifelong artist, and I can get into this later, but have recently made a major life choice to essentially dedicate my life to art and being the best artist that I can be, and especially as it relates to bringing beauty and joy and well-being into people's lives through artwork and also through a connection to nature. And that's super important to me because I realized it's actually been many years that pretty much all of our free time we spend adventuring and trying to find new and amazing places to hang out and explore and just be for as much time as we can. And Oregon is so rich with opportunities to do that. It's just amazing. Yeah, in terms of exploration and places that I love in Oregon, it is just so hard to pick my favorite. I've actually lived in a lot of different places in the state. I was born on the coast down around Coos Bay, and grew up most of my childhood in Jacksonville, Oregon, small town down in Southern Oregon. Lived in Bend, lived in Corvallis, Portland for a while, Eugene for a while. Actually, most of my time is in Eugene, and those are all just great places, kind of jumping off points to explore. And so if you look at like a radius around all those places, it covers a good portion of the state. And we get out and explore all the different corners, and it's just so hard for me to pick a favorite. If I don't know, if I had to really narrow it down, I would say that I'm kind of maybe a mountain person. I just love being in the mountains. I love especially the wildest places you can find, really, is what we seek out. And a lot of those are in the mountains. They usually involve beautiful rivers as well. You know, the watersheds and the high points as far away as you can get from roads and civilization are some of the most sort of pristine and magical places for me personally. But everywhere in between is just incredible. I mean, right here in the valley or over on the east side, everywhere. It's just an embarrassment of natural beauty, really.
It's true. It's always hard for me to answer a question like that too. So sorry about that.
No, I mean, I could throw out some secret places.
Well, let me ask you this next question, and maybe they can come out. So, the topic of the webcast, and the art that we'll be talking about is wild and scenic rivers. So, do you know, maybe a couple of favorite rivers in Oregon that might currently be wild and scenic, have wild and scenic designation? And I am going to throw up a oh, actually, I was going to throw up a map. There's a map.
Oh yeah, so rivers that currently have designation. Yeah, oh gosh, it's hard and it's easy. I mean, as someone who grew up in Southern Oregon, it's really easy to point out the Rogue. The Rogue River is an incredible wild and scenic resource. You know, it's just loaded with fish, and the wildlife there is just mind blowing. The Illinois River is also really awesome. I just love the way that it looks, the quality of the water, you know, the landscape. It's just so rocky and rugged and wild. So those are a couple of faves in Southern Oregon. You know, the John Day is awesome, and kind of northeast there. Gosh, who doesn't like that? Um, the Deschutes, I've spent a lot of time on the Deschutes, you know, fishing and rafting and camping and doing all kinds of stuff. And let's see, I think is the North Umpqua is on there. Yep. And that's just a world class beautiful river in so many ways, for rafting and fly fishing and, you know, mountain biking. There's an incredible trail along there.
Pretty much anything you want to do, right? They're great rivers.
Actually, anything you want to do. I mean, I can't even, when I think about counting up all the hours, you know, blissful hours that I've spent on the rivers in Oregon, wild rivers in Oregon, it's just, I can't do it.
Well, I try. Well, I mean, there's just going to be more.
You know, I'll be honest with you though, a lot of these rivers, until we really started getting into this, I didn't actually know about the wild and scenic designation. It's not like there's a big sign that says, hey, the reason this wild river is here is because people had the foresight, you know, 40 years ago to create this designation and make sure that the values are, you know, preserved for people in the future. So I really didn't know. You know, and I guess I would say we're really lucky, but you know, you make your own luck, right?
It's true. It's people, recognizing the importance of these rivers, and recognizing that they needed protection,
Yeah.
and so I'm actually going to back up a bit and talk about, what it means to be a wild and scenic river, because I think it's true. A lot of people don't know, when they're out there enjoying spectacular places like the Rogue River pictured here, that it might have this designation. So, um, bear with me as I do a little tiny history lesson to fill other folks in. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is a federal law that was passed by Congress back in 1968. So a little over 50 years ago. And it's very quite simple and straightforward in many ways. And here's like the key phrase, or legal language here, which is that it was enacted to preserve certain rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition for the enjoyment of present and future generations. And the goal is really to protect and preserve the unique character and attributes of, our nation's most pristine rivers, while also balancing other values like recreation, water quality, fish, wildlife, and other values, some of which are named here, but there's many others as we all can imagine. So it's uh, you know back to this map, I think we can all agree, and I know they're not all named on here, that we have some amazing rivers in Oregon. And um, un- really fortunately, starting back in 1968, we've our congressional representatives have added over 2,000 miles of rivers into that system to be protected under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Though that is a small portion of the 111,000 miles of rivers and streams in Oregon. So it's really just less than 2% of the total stream miles in Oregon. So there's plenty of rivers and streams out there, and we'll talk more about those.
So that's less than 2% that are currently designated, right?
Yes, exactly. Um, so these wild rivers have to meet a couple of criteria in order to be designated. So one of those is that they're free flowing, so they're not dammed, and but that might include sections of rivers in between dams, or upstream of dams, for example. They have to have outstanding remarkable values. That's legal language, but one that I think we can all kind of wrap our heads around. And then, they flow through primarily federal public lands because it's a federal law, and so that's what it affects is streams that are part of that flow through our federal public lands. And just a couple of examples, and that we haven't already tossed out there. So there's the North Fork of the Middle Fork of the Willamette, the Metolius River. Absolutely unparalleled for so many reasons. Here's a picture of the North Umpqua that we already talked about, and of course the Rogue River that people can enjoy in so many ways, um, that it's hard to wrap your head around. Um, and the protections under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that help keep, the um, and preserve the nature of these rivers essentially does a few simple things. One is it prohibits things like new dams and extraction of oil and gas. And it creates a buffer corridor that can be either a quarter mile or a half mile on either side of the river, where activities that would degrade the outstanding values aren't allowed. So those values might include, like I said, fish, wildlife, recreation, scenery, cultural resources. And so you just can't degrade those resources and values, but other activities would still be allowed. And so it's, like I said, fairly straightforward and really powerful in so many ways. I mean, all these rivers that I've mentioned so far and that Robin loves really benefit from this protection. Now, the rivers that you painted, Robin, aren't currently protected as wild and scenic rivers under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, with like the capitalization there. But they are both wild and very scenic and have plenty of values that could be protected with future federal designation. And I guess that's one of the main reasons we're here today, is that Senator Wyden, Oregon senior senator, is a big fan of wild and scenic rivers. And he most recently helped protect Lawson Creek, here pictured here as a wild and scenic river, which is in the Devil's Staircase Wilderness, just last year. So that was added to the system. And then this last October, he announced an initiative to take nominations for rivers and streams to add to the Wild and Scenic Rivers list, because he really wanted to like drastically increase that 2,000 miles that we have and really start to lay the groundwork for major protections all over the state. So we took nominations for 4 months, starting last October and into January. And due to all the public outreach that groups like Oregon Wild did to get people engaged in this effort, he received more than 15,000 nominations, totaling more than 4,000 river miles across Oregon from people who love rivers. They came from Yeah. They came from rafting guides, fly fisher people, whitewater kayakers, hikers, artists, middle school students, and breweries who rely on clean water from around the state. And the rivers and streams are really all over the state, from the coastal dunes to the headwaters of the Willamette to high desert streams in far eastern Oregon. And they represent really key sources of clean drinking water that we all enjoy, every imaginable recreation opportunity, and the best native fish habitat in the state. And Oregon Wild's been a part of a statewide coalition working to, both nominate these rivers to Senator Wyden and support his efforts. Okay, that's enough background probably for the moment. And let's get into the meat of this and talk more about your art, Robin. And I think now might be a good time to show um, a short video, a little 3-minute video that you created. And let me make sure that I can do that. Hang on a second. Here we go. Okay, and then we'll get into talking about this and other beautiful paintings. So hang on one sec. Let's show this. And folks at home, if it's too quiet, that means you need to turn up your volume.
We live in such an amazing place. In Oregon, we're surrounded with this incredible richness of natural beauty. And our wild rivers are a big part of that. My name is Robin Hostick. I'm an artist and a 4th-generation Oregonian. I paint portraits of natural beauty, portraits of the wild. And my goal as an artist is to bring people joy through art and through the beauty of the natural world. And also to foster a love of the natural world, of course, so that we can preserve it. And of course, not just for ourselves, but for many generations of Oregonians in the future. The land has given me so much, and I'm so grateful for this partnership with Oregon Wild, because it's a way for me to give something back. This series of special paintings showcases 6 different rivers that are candidates for federal wild and scenic designation. And what that does is help preserve these rivers and some of the amazing forest that surrounds them for all the outdoor activities that Oregonians love. And of course, it helps preserve the habitat for wildlife and helps preserve our amazing water quality. I spent several months this spring and summer exploring these rivers and looking for places that really capture the personality of each river. All of these places are changing, and to do them justice the way they are today, to really express that is a joy, and it's kind of a responsibility, because they won't be like this next year or the year after. This body of artwork is dedicated to getting the Wild and Scenic designation in place and passed in partnership with Oregon Wild. Part of the proceeds from each original painting and each special edition print goes directly to Oregon Wild to help them support the campaign to get the Wild and Scenic designation passed for these rivers. There's a whole list of rivers, and I wish I could paint them all. Maybe someday I will.
That was great. Great introduction. Yeah. Yeah. Do you know a flute player, or is that just some
Garage band. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great introduction. And I guess maybe just dive in and tell us a little bit about each of the rivers that you painted for this campaign and why they were special to you. I mean, I know I've been to almost all of these streams, and uh,
Mhm.
they're all very special. Like you said, I wish I could paint them all. I wish I could visit them all. But you know, tell us about the South Fork Mackenzie.
Yeah, sure. Oh, you know, the South Fork Mackenzie. I mean, this is kind of my backyard down here in Eugene. Um, you know, it's the headwaters of a famous river. I mean, the Mackenzie is like it's kind of an institution. You know, it is a river. It's interesting, and there's so many things about it that are just sort of legendary. From fishing to the even a style of boat, right? And all the activities and more that go along with that. The South Fork is interesting because it winds way up. I mean, this is the headwaters of the whole thing, right? So as you go farther and farther upstream, you get more kind of clear and cold water. And it's just the thing about this painting that, you can kind of see down into that water. You can see the river flowing over. It's just crystal clear, flowing over this kind of rainbow colored stones, smooth polished stones in the bottom of the water. And it's just these towering forests growing up on either side. It's pretty awesome. And that was actually from the spring. So the alders along the banks are just bursting with these little chartreuse buds, and they just kind of glow in front of the ancient forest around there. So I spent so much time hiking, even way up in the headwaters of this river, and a lot of
Which
mountains.
are kind of in the wilderness, I believe, like up in the Three Sisters.
Yeah, Three Sisters Wilderness. That's right to the north, I think. You get up into Rebel Creek, Rebel Rock, and some of these other really famous streams. On the south side, I think on the south side you have Chuxney Mountain, some
Hmm.
of these other just sort of unique and beautiful places, and there's all these meadowlands up there. So you can tell if you spend time in this area why this water is so clean and beautiful. I mean, anybody who's, I guess, lived, I mean, we're just super lucky in Oregon in general, but especially here to have the Mackenzie's our drinking water, right? It comes right out of the tap. This Mackenzie water with a little cranberry juice right here. Good. It just doesn't get any better than that, honestly. So,
Awesome. Well, I love this portrayal, and you really can like see into the water here, which is definitely one of those unique things about these crystal clear mountain streams.
yeah, well, it's the dark and light. You have the sort of this. That's one thing I find interesting about this particular work is the light spills down across the top of the water, but you still have this really deep forest off to the left there, and that's just something that you find a lot up in these areas. Is the waterway is actually a conduit for light and all this energy and water just crashing down through there, and then you step off of that, just a few feet, and suddenly you're just engulfed in this kind of solitude of the forest. So this
Except
is fun.
you can kind of hear the river through the forest. Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear the river and you can hear the birds echoing through the forest. Yeah, this is very cool.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to move to a pretty different landscape now with the next one, moving over into the Ochoco Mountains in Central Oregon and the North Fork of the Crooked River. I see
Hmm.
some ponderosa pines here.
Yeah, exactly. That brings up a good point. So this, it's been a few days up here along the North Fork Crooked River, and all these tributaries that go off of that. There's Deep Creek, which is literally right around the corner from this location. I think Jackson Creek. Um, there's a little Prairie Summit Prairie Creek or something like that. Anyway, there's a whole list of these creeks up there, headwaters of this river that kind of branch up into this tableland out there, and it's in the east side of the Ochoco Mountains. So as the Ochoco's kind of flow out into the high desert, that's the headwaters of all this whole river system. And it's super cool because it's kind of like a blend of the forest, the ponderosa pine forest, some of which is just towering, and which is just, huge trees, when they get big, they kind of bend and sort of tilt in these different ways. And and then these rim rocks, and then the river, of course, flows down through that. And there's been some incredible work done up there, I noticed, in restoration, because a lot of these areas are grazed as well. And you can see even in this image, there's this reemergence of vegetation. This is one of the areas that's actually being restored, which I found really interesting, because you can see how things are sort of coming back up, and the river flows down through there, and there's marshlands. So finding a place, although it is a challenge actually to find a place that captures the essence of a river, because it's not just looking at the water, of course. You can just take it's more than that. It's what's surrounding it. It's the whole landscape. So to find a location, a real location, and all these are real locations, that sort of has all those elements in it and has the right kind of light and mood, and that it just says something unique about that waterway that's different from any other one. It's actually hugely challenging. Like literally, you can spend days. You think, oh yeah, you just show up and oh yeah, the river's amazing, and of course it is, because you're immersed in it, right? When you're there, it's like you look this way, you look that way. It's all beautiful. It's all amazing. But in terms of presenting it as sort of a vignette, from the standpoint of an artist, is actually super challenging, but rewarding too, because I get to spend all this time climbing around in the rivers, and there's golden eagles flying overhead, and all this wildlife. This particular
Nice.
location, though, you told me about the native red band trout that lives out here in this area, and that's I think it's indigenous to this region, and it actually has. I brought my fly fishing gear, so I actually did catch a couple of little native red band trout. And they're beautiful. They're really unique. They look different than other fish. And they actually live in water that is a little higher temperature than other trout, which makes them really adaptable. And so this image in this painting, you can see down into the water. There's little pools of sunlight kind of down in there. And I just imagine the native red band trout down in the water, right? And you can kind of feel the forest up around you. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. And
Well,
I bet those little trout appreciate the restoration and the cows not trampling all over their rocks and vegetation as well.
yeah,
Cows do
no,
a lot of damage in these, and Wild and Scenic River designation doesn't necessarily preclude grazing. I've been on some in Eastern Oregon, like the North Fork of the Malheur, for example, that had grazing issues. But it's something that can be controlled, and if you can show that it would impact, the fishery value, for example, of a stream, then it can be reduced.
yeah, I noticed that some of the landowners seem actually to be doing a really good job of fencing off, along the corridors, and you can see how a lot of vegetation is coming back. So it's a mixed bag, but the restoration work is amazing. I mean, I was really surprised, and it looked good. And interestingly enough, I found more fish in the restored areas. I mean, no question about it.
That's that's good to hear. Cool. All right, I'm going to move down south into the Umpqua Basin and back to the west side, and this is the South Umpqua, which maybe is the lesser known, less charismatic of the two big forks of the Umpqua. We talked about the North Umpqua earlier, which is already designated as a Wild and Scenic River and has amazing steelhead runs that it's known for, and all the beautiful waterfalls along the way. But South Umpqua is not so bad, is it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So again, I mentioned being from Southern Oregon. This is the climate is so different. You kind of hit Roseburg and you go south, and it sort of changes. You have a different mix of forest. It's drier, it's hotter, and this painting expresses that a little bit. This was actually in the later spring, and you look at for example, the rocks. There's these cliffs all over the place, and the river kind of flows between these incredibly, like, these emerald colored pools, right? The color of the water of the South Umpqua is so unique. And I didn't actually expect that, but it is this amazing emerald green color. And it's not like it's an opaque emerald, it's like a transparent emerald. It just makes you want to jump in. And so it flows in these kind of these long pools between, between cliffs, and then it crashes down and goes to another area that flows through. And these cliffs right here, there's this kind of bright, warm color, kind of an orange color. And you would think, is that the color of the rock? And it's actually not. It's these mosses that cover the rocks in the, in the late fall, in the winter, and the spring. They're bright green and kind of flourishing. But then they flower, and then they dry out really fast because it's so hot. And when they dry out and kind of bake in the sun, they turn this interesting kind of a rusty color. And so you have these beautiful kind of orange rusty colored cliffs, and the river flowing, this emerald green river flowing through there, and then this forest around it. It's just super unique.
It's really beautiful. And I guess, I've spent a lot of time, as you have, in forests all over Oregon and along rivers all over Oregon. And when I look at these paintings, and I'm thinking about this right now, I really feel like I'm just standing there on the rock looking down into the water, like I'm looking at a photograph, or I have this memory, um, with the light and the movement that you have in there. And I am most definitely not an artist. So, like, can you tell us a little bit about how you do that as a
Yeah,
technique?
yeah, sure. It's so these are all oil paintings. They're all oil and canvas, and oil painting. It's interesting because there's just a lot of texture and richness that you can kind of imbue into the painting just with a brushwork. And I work very quickly because I like to introduce a lot of energy into the painting. I think that especially if you spend a lot of time in a place and you kind of get to know it. And I've written about this just recently, but it's almost like a portrait of a place, right? And so you spend enough time there that you really get to, you get a feel for it, right? And this place, I spent several days here as well, just like around the Ochakos. And you come back and you think about it, and you're like, gosh, what is really going to capture that best? And so before you even start painting, there's so much that goes into it. But in terms of the technique itself, I paint usually, nonstop. If I have to paint over several days, sometimes it depends on how big it is, depends on how complex it is. Sometimes I'll finish one in a day and just absolutely focus on that completely until it's done. And that gives it this freshness. It's like there's all this energy that goes into it up front, and then it comes out in one shot, right? To get the painting kind of the way it's supposed to be. And that gives it the freshness. It's intuitive. There's a lot of really active brushwork. And then in terms of the color palette, I should also mention that there's an underpainting under all of these, which means that there's usually some kind of a vibrant color. Often it's like a warm color. Typically I choose, especially if there's a lot of green and forest, because it creates that color harmony. Just with the eye, the way we see color, it's actually really important to have little bits of complementary colors and analogous colors coming through there. So I could talk about that a lot, but in essence, I try to go with the natural color harmonies because it's already so beautiful and so harmonious, and just push a few things about it that really seem to stand out in terms of what this place is and how it feels to be there. But I'll give you another example. I mean, water, just taking water, how do you express what? All you have is a brush, and then you have these colors, right? And the idea, it just seems kind of silly when you think about it, and the idea is to render the place with feeling and with life. And when you think about the surface of the water, for example, depending on what the water's doing, if it's fast, if it's slow, if there's light reflecting from it, if you're seeing into it, all those things are actually really complex. And when you're standing there watching it, you just don't really, it's hard to think about how you might express that. But over time, right, you start to be able to parse these little elements out, where the reflection is coming from, how the water changes the colors of things that are underneath the water. All those things go into each one of these paintings. And it's really, it's decades of practice really.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
check it
And
out.
do you I mean, you know, you mentioned seeping yourself in a place and spending a lot of time there. Do you also take pictures to kind of remind yourself for when you're back in the studio?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I paint primarily from reference photos that I take. Um, hundreds and hundreds of reference photos that I take. And I do some on-site painting just to, do a study here or there or capture colors, that kind of thing. But mainly in the studio, partly because these are large paintings, right? It would be very impractical to try to do these on site. Part of the time I'm standing in the water or I'm balancing on a log or a rock or something, or there's, who knows what's going on. It just doesn't, it's just not feasible to try to paint these places. Wilderness is I mean, you could certainly, you could do plein air painting in the wilderness. No question about it, but it's going to limit you. Okay. And for a subject like this, most of the time, I don't want to be limited. I want to find that place and that moment that says something about the river. And you spend enough time to understand what that place and moment is that you can express it back in the studio. Right. So, yes, photography is a big part of it.
Cool.
Love photography, but it just doesn't do that. There's art can bring something more to it.
Yeah, I agree. As someone who likes to take pictures, this is blows
Yeah,
mine out of the water. uh, well, let's move into the Coast Range.
sure.
The South Fork Alsea River, which is a place that I don't, unless you live in Eugene or Corvallis or, on the coast not far from these places, you might not have driven the really beautiful paved road that goes along the South Fork of the Alsea River through, a mixture of Bureau of Land Management and private lands. And there's beautiful Alsea Falls that you can stop at. There's mountain bike trails, but it's kind of this like hidden in the middle of the Coast Range sort of place, far from Portland. So maybe we should keep it that way. But but tell us about your experience there.
No, it's yeah, what a beautiful place. This location happens to be not too far from Alsea Falls,
Oh,
which is um, which is incredible. If anybody is ever in that part of the state and wants to see a beautiful place, that's it. It's actually, and part of it is the river and the falls. Those are beautiful, but the forest around it is just breathtaking. It's kind of half, it's in smack in the middle of the Coast Range, and so you get this coastal feel. It starts to smell a little bit like, the ocean, but then you have kind of, the type of forest that grows a little bit on the west side of the Coast Range too. But it's incredibly beautiful. It has a really unique feel all its own. I've spent a lot of time on the main stem Alsea, which is also really incredible. This particular location, it's like a lot of places along this river, the vegetation is so lush. I mean, this is a temperate rainforest, right? You think of rainforests being maybe somewhere else, but no, there's a ton of them right here in Oregon, and they're amazing. So you can see the moss sort of hanging off of these trees. There's a pattern of that vegetation in the understory that there's a lot of movement in it because it's just constantly moving in the wind, and the light hits every leaf in a little different way. And then of course, with the light coming through the canopy of these trees, just creates this sort of a golden, beautiful green color, and everything glows with that color. And as the river flows through underneath, I like to say water is hardly ever blue, right? In this case, it's kind of there's rust colors in there. There's kind of some purple tones in there, and that's how it is, and that's how it feels. It's reflecting what's around it. And also you can see through the bottom of this river. I think you can in virtually all the paintings, and it's part of the character of the river that I wanted to convey. Is you see the trees, you see the character of the vegetation, you see the rocks and the banks, and you also see down into the water. And this one happens to have kind of a clay sort of a bottom with rocks sticking up out of it. It's really interesting and also really characteristic of a lot of coastal rivers. And there's gravel beds off to the right where you can see the current flowing around there. You know, there's probably spawning beds and that sort of thing in the gravel beds. And then other places where the water is slower, it settles down into that kind of a more muddy bottom. Such a beautiful place. I can almost smell it just thinking about it.
I want to wait till it's a little bit warmer, but then
Yeah.
it might really smell. Although this river corridor is not a bad place to find chanterelles a little earlier in the fall,
It's
or
true.
maybe right now.
It's slippery as heck down there. It's like super slippery. And it's about what happened. I dropped a a piece of my camera equipment into the river. This is pretty early spring, and it was cold, and I got down in my underwear and I was ready to go after it. And it was watching it in this riffle, and the riffle just carried it away. It was just gone forever. And I was like, oh, well, that's probably a good thing, actually.
Because you would have gotten very wet and very cold.
Probably a bad idea.
There's so many adventures to be had, good and
Yeah.
bad. All right, before we do our last coastal one, I'm going to go back to the other side of the Willamette Valley to Fall Creek, which is a tributary to the Middle Fork of the Willamette, not far outside of Eugene. And so if you live around Eugene, you probably know it. It's a very popular destination for hiking and swimming in beautiful swimming holes, and there's a lot of fish up there. So this one, sorry, I'm just gonna just because I'm looking at it now, I'm like, there's red spotches everywhere, and that just really jumps out at me. And as far as like a technique to make colors, really pop. And so maybe you could chat about that a little bit as you talk about Fall Creek.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the red spots, that's part of the underpainting showing through underneath this. And yeah, it helps the colors vibrate a little bit. It paradoxically deepens the greens because this is a deep forest, right? There's some really old trees. One of the coolest things about this corridor is these huge maple trees. They're like 120 feet tall. Just, if you were to put your hand into the moss of one of these trees, it would go up to your elbow, right? It's like this giant moss pillow around the tree. It's amazing. So yeah, and you know what? The interesting thing about this river is if you look at the river itself, it's kind of a rainbow, right? Like the bottom of the river. As I was mentioning earlier, it's clear. There's a little turbidity in this. Or it depends on what time of year you're up there. There's a little turbidity, but you can still see down in there. And so the deep parts are kind of this aqua blue, and then as you get up to the banks, these kind of ochre-colored banks, and reds and purples. All these, there's just literally a rainbow in the river, and it's like and you don't really know that until you really look at water and think about how you're going to characterize the water with paint. And if you don't, really express the colors that are there, it's just not going to be it doesn't express the place. So I was kind of surprised actually myself, because the more time that I spent there, the more I realized that I was just fascinated with the bottom of the river. And so this one, this one shows that kind of flowing through there, you can see the light kind of bouncing off of those smaller trees back in the distance. And the corridor again, or the river, is kind of like a light channel down into the forest, and the sun just sort of lights up the bottom there.
Yeah, you really get a sense of that in this painting.
Yeah, I told a little story in one of the other videos. I'll just share it here, but I actually have 8mm film from my grandparents from 1945. Okay, which I didn't know there was color film until in 1945 until I was looking at these things. And they're local folks. My generations of my family are from this area, and I have film of my grandmother in this red bathing suit swimming in Fall Creek. It's like hanging out on the rocks like a mermaid, and they're jumping in and out of this clean, clear water. And the cool thing is you can still go up there today. I mean, this was in 1945. I doubt it's a whole lot different, right? The places where they were swimming, you still go up there and there are tons of people hanging out on the rocks, swimming and having a good time. So I just thought that was the coolest thing.
Definitely, definitely. Especially, as you said, the areas do change a lot, and Fall Creek is one of those places that has seen fires along it,
Yeah.
over the last 10 years or so. Though there is still, forests that look like this along its banks. But the river and the rocks, maybe don't change as much. Those holes that people love swimming in are probably there for centuries, which is really cool, even as the
Yeah.
landscape around changes a bit.
Yeah, it's true. There's more sunlight coming in certain areas, that's for sure. But it's like a patchwork. You go up there and there are pretty large areas that are burned, but then there are these groves that still exist all up and down the corridor. So,
Yeah. Okay, to the last painting.
mhm.
Um, and I saved it for last because it might be my favorite. But Gwynn Creek out on the Central Oregon coast. Short little stream that comes out of the, off the um, western slope facing the ocean, and adjacent to the Cummins Creek Wilderness, which I feel like this painting really encompasses that area, and what these sort of like almost like estuary streams are like in the Coast Range.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting you say that because it does kind of feel like this tiny little estuary. Like you see that all the ferns growing everywhere, right? This place is amazing. I've been here a number of times before, but when I went back and spent time there for this project, it's just like the land that time forgot. I mean, really, the ferns. The thing that's hard about this place and hard to capture artistically is the scale. Everything is huge. It's like strangely huge. These sword ferns can get pretty big, right? But you walk into these and they're literally, the sword ferns are as tall as I am. It's weird. Part of it is they've been growing for a long time. They're like old growth sword ferns and they're kind of up on their own mound, right? But part of it is they're just freaking huge. And then there's these spruce trees, the Sitka spruce that grow down in this area and all up and down the coast. And some of them are absolutely gigantic. And this happens to be a maple tree that's growing up on this cliff on the side there. And the maple tree is spreading for 100 feet out over across the river and everything. And on the other side, there's all these alders. And I mean, like you say, there's a wild river. It's short, but it's super active because it rains a lot on the coast and it blows out with these big floods that come down through there. And so it'll wipe out areas that are kind of flat and low lying, like this part is down towards the end of the stream, and open it up, and then the alders pop up, right? And so you have these alder groves that are just moving, and there's sunlight and all this kind of energy going on in those, and then you have this really super deep forest right next to that, and gigantic logs. Like I think there's a huge log across the stream. You might have eaten lunch on that log, I don't know, but you can picnic there with several people on this log comfortably, right? It's huge. Anyway,
Totally.
it's
And
a
I
really
think
cool.
it is such a cool place, and I've used those logs to get around in this area too. And I guess one thing I want to note is, one of the good things about Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is, when they protect rivers like this, is it's not just, it's not just the water, it is that forest surrounding it too. And so the natural processes like, logs falling into the water and providing, this light effect, and protecting those old growth trees is also, part of the package, because it's part of the character of the rivers that we're talking about. I mean, we saw that through all of these all have forests around them. So that's something that can be quite powerful with Wild and Scenic Rivers.
Oh, absolutely. I just could not imagine this place not being wild. It's impossible. I mean, you get back in there and walking between these ferns, they're basically, you're following elk trails, and they're everywhere in there, right? But you wouldn't know because all they have to do is duck. And
It's amazing that to think about sword ferns taller than elk. But
yeah,
they've scared me more than once coming out of the ferns too.
Yeah.
Uh, um, well,
Well,
Robin,
very,
um, not all artists like to stray into, the political or advocacy arena with their
sure.
art, but you came to me to Oregon Wild wanting to partner and benefit the advocacy work that we do. So, tell us why that's important to you
Yeah,
as an artist.
it's a great question. My whole career, I've done a lot of things career-wise. And I mentioned early on that I've recently made a big transition. I was a landscape architect for many years. Um, I worked in urban design, I worked in city planning. Everything I've done is really about doing good and helping to preserve um, the the place that we live, really, to improve it, to make our cities better, which also protects our, the surrounding lands and forests and farmlands, everything, right? So it's all part of the same deal. For me, in terms of getting into advocacy, because I guess I just realized that um, I spend so much time out in the land. It's kind of a primary thing for me. It's, the natural world, in my opinion, unites all of us. It crosses, it doesn't know political boundaries. It doesn't know race or ethnicity or age or gender, anything like that, right? It's kind of the one primary thing for all people. There are a lot of other things that unite us together, but the land is a big one because in my opinion, it takes care of us, right? All the ecological services, we now call them. We didn't have a name for that pretty, fairly recently. And now we're starting to understand that if, as long as we take care of the land, it'll take care of us. And it just seems pretty simple and obvious, but I think it's easy to forget that because, well, I think what now half of the human population lives in cities now, right? I think it's pretty close to 50% in climbing. So I think not only, you know, I, this kind of gets into what art is all about too, right? But, the reason I think that I reached out is, well, I have three main goals as an artist. I'll just throw it out really simply. The first one is to really advance my skill and my craft as an artist as far as I can in my lifetime. Another goal is to bring joy and well-being to people by creating opportunities to have art in our lives, right? In our everyday lives, like bringing the natural beauty and art into our lives every day. It's actually really good for us, right? I mean, being in nature is awesome. And studies, I've actually researched this, studies have shown, I've known this intuitively for a very long time as a landscape architect, but as a painter, actually just having images of art in your life, and a lot of us are kind of, in the pandemic days, a little bit locked in some ways. It's really nice to have a window into something beautiful, especially if it's a place that you relate to, that's local and that means something to you. It's especially awesome. So yeah, bringing people joy is another one. And the third one really relates most to why this, I kind of reached out to you, is just to contribute as much as I can to the important work of conservation through art, because, well, I think I can. I think I can. So it's something I can do, right? It's if it's a gift or a skill or something that I've chosen to spend my life developing, if I can find a way to connect that to something I'm also passionate about, which is the outdoors, and to do good in that, it's like a four-way win. It's, it just seems really natural. It's as simple as that. So
That seems like a perfectly good reason to me. That's it's so great. And I think you've created, some pieces of art that are really going to reach people. I mean, that they really bring these places to life. And, one of the reasons that at Oregon Wild, we, have led hikes for many years, is to get people out there. It's why I wrote a book about hiking in old growth forests, is to get people out there to experience the joy and the wonder and, learn about these places, appreciate them, because then it might bring them to want to protect them, to conserve them however
Mhm.
they can. So you're doing that work through this, and we really, really appreciate it.
Well,
Um,
the opportunity is amazing, and I really appreciate your partnership and everything that you've done and everything that Oregon Wild has done. I'm a
awesome.
personal beneficiary. Generations of my family are beneficiaries, and I hope many more will be.
Awesome. Well, as a last softball before, I think we can take one or two questions. And yeah, and it was in the video, but maybe just quickly tell us more about the fundraising side of this partnership and
Sure.
what you have to offer with these paintings.
Yeah. Um, well, so there's 6 paintings as we look through. They're all original oil paintings on gallery. They're high quality canvas. 1.5-inch profile. Um, they're super high quality materials, durable. Um, they look great. I wish I could show you the size of them right now, but there is another video that'll be on my website where I kind of go through and introduce each painting and say, talk about a few of the things that we talked about here today. And you can get more of a sense for what each of the paintings looks like in person. Although the colors, you really kind of have to see in person. So there are the originals that are for sale, and then there is a special edition print series of each one of the paintings. So the print series is limited to 200 prints of each painting. Won't make any more than that. And
And
there are
there's two sizes.
two sizes. That's right. Two sizes. There's kind of a medium size, and then there's a larger size. And I'm working with a local printer here in Eugene. All these frames are handmade here in Eugene. They're all assembled locally. The printing is done locally. It's using the highest quality materials, super heavy duty acid-free paper, UV resistant inks. This is just like the best technology that there is for printing. Seriously, it's really awesome. So I worked with them a lot to get everything dialed in just with the colors. And so what you see in a print is very, very close to what you see in the original. It doesn't have the luminosity quite that an original oil painting has, but it's pretty darn good. Even the texture of the canvas and everything is in there. So super high quality images were used to create these. So anyway, you can order those in a without a frame, or there's also a frame available. And that's something that I picked out. I think has a really super clean, modern look. Each print is hand signed, numbered, and originals and prints come with a certificate of authenticity that's signed by me that is basically provenance for your artwork. And that helps make sure that it has lasting value.
Awesome. And I'll note that your website is on the slide that's on the screen right now, and it's on Oregon Wild's website, and that's where you can go and see, the originals and the prints and the prices and all that kind of stuff. So if folks are interested in, gifts or for yourself or others, a very dear one, please go check it out and share the information. Um, so with that, I think, yeah, it's 7 o'clock. So if folks want to hang in for just a couple of minutes for one or two questions, I think we answered a bunch of them as they came in. But I had a couple of questions about the fires, which I'm not surprised about because they affected so much of Western Oregon this year, and people are wondering whether it impacted any of the rivers that you painted, and I'm pretty sure the answer is no, even though you were out there before the fires happened.
Yeah, I don't think so. At this point, I don't think so. There were a couple of other rivers and places that I planned to visit that were impacted. And I will say that these paintings are a snapshot in time, right? It is a time capsule because, forest fires, the seasons are they're getting more intense, and we're seeing a lot of fires happen. So I think it's not unexpected that some of these places that I did paint probably will burn. So it's something to think about, and it's also something that I think about a lot as an artist, because it's almost a sense of urgency for me, because even though there's a lot of natural beauty, no matter what's going on with the fire cycle, the way things are now, right, especially when you have ancient forest in combination with these beautiful rivers, is super unique. And so that's part of what motivates me to get out there and document and express wild places.
Cool. And another question that someone asked was about, existing wild and scenic rivers that might have been impacted by fire, and that the answer I know is definitely yes. Big portions of the Mackenzie River, the main stem, did burn, although a lot of that's below the wild and scenic river section. But the Clackamas and in the Riverside fire. Gosh, now I'm totally spacing on some of the other ones, but there's many rivers that are on, that were nominated through Senator Wyden's nomination process that did burn, and that doesn't make them any less suitable for wild and scenic river designation. Like we said, I mean, it's a natural process, and these rivers are always changing. There's lots of wild and scenic rivers that have been designated in the past that have burned and are still gorgeous and just changing. So that may be a consideration, of Senator Wyden's moving forward, but I hope that they're considered for protection. Some of these places that burned, because they quite honestly need the protection from things like logging after fires, which can do a lot of damage, and harm the watershed, the river itself. So I think it's even more important for some of those places. And let's see, one other question about the prints. Any chance there will ever be postcards for advocacy use? That's a good question.
Good question.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah, it could be.
And I mean, as the campaign to protect more wild and scenic rivers in Oregon progresses, it'll be really important for the public to support that and let Senator Wyden know. And so postcards with beautiful art might be just the ticket. So we'll be in touch about that. I think that's about all the questions that we had. There were I think, like I said, I was tried to prompt you, or you just answered most of them as we went along. So I think we'll leave it at that. And again, thank you everybody for being here and for sharing, these wonderful places with Robin. Robin, for you, thank you so much for doing this work and sharing it with us.
Thank you, Chandra, and thank you everyone for watching. It's really been my pleasure.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your evening, everyone. See you out there.